So, of the four factors I mentioned, which is model and technique or structure, hope and expectancy, relational factors, and the therapist, their self, of those particular factors, I mentioned one, the relationship. And I'm glad you follow up, because I've been accused of saying, even though I've never said this, well, the relationship is all that matters. I've never once in my life said that. But for me, in my efforts to improve, very often I've found that the shortcomings that create random and recurring, or that create recurring and ongoing problems in my work with clients, have been in the relational domain. For other therapists, it may be the structure, the focus, the rationale. They just might not be spinning the rationale that engages their particular clients, or their rationale may be too tight and not allow for and to flexibly accommodate the individual. I don't know. The only way to do that is to measure and then map the performance onto something like the taxonomy of deliberate practice activities, which helps you figure out, well, where is my weakness located? Because as I said, there are a whole host of experts that will tell you what you need to learn. If you say, well, what should I focus on? Here's what you need to learn. It'll just happen to be whatever it is they're selling. I'm not selling anything. I'm not selling anything, except for it's going to take a shitload of work to do what I'm saying. You're going to have to measure, you're going to have to map it onto that, you're going to have to find a coach, you'll have to work on it, and any changes that happen will not be like the miraculous things you witness in video demonstrations at workshops.
It's so
These sort of
interesting.
hallelujah moments, what I might call a tent meeting of psychotherapy, with the itinerant priest there saying, if you follow my method, you'll be saved.
It's so interesting. There's a story about Carl Rogers, who just did his thing, connecting with people. And for those who might not be aware of Carl Rogers, I don't know who listening won't be aware of him, but he was like the first researcher, psychotherapy researcher, as well as clinician, as far as I understand. He's the one who took that sort of grain seriously, as far as establishing a way of checking in on how our clients are going. But they put him in a room to try to learn his method, and had an observation of people kind of looking in and saying, okay, well, how can we kind of replicate this? And it just didn't work. It's really interesting how you're so, and I think other therapies, kind of like somatic experiencing therapies, which are kind of trauma based type of therapies, which you're constantly connecting with the client and asking, all right, what's happening for you right now as we sit down, and how do we kind of work through that from a body-based point of view. It's so it's so different from session to session that you can't necessarily map everything that's going to go out on a 1 to 10 formula. uh, and I guess what I'm saying here is being with the client and understanding their issues, and knowing what they're bringing to the table, kind of from a medical point of view. You don't just look at heart disease. You kind of look at everything that they've come in with, and kind of consider that. It's I think it's a whole paradigm challenge for me right now to
Mm,
try to conceptualize it all. And I
mm.
hope I'm doing a adequate job of understanding what you're putting down.
So I think you're right that although you don't have to do this in order to start with deliberate practice, I do think it's helpful to consider the paradigm that you operate under. And most of us don't think about that, because paradigms are a little bit like air. You only notice it when it's foul. Otherwise, you don't even notice you're breathing most of the time. So there are two paradigms, and one is clearly dominant. The dominant one is, as we've mentioned, the medical paradigm. There's nothing wrong with the medical paradigm. The question is, do the facts accumulated about what we do as psychotherapists fit that paradigm? I'm arguing they do not at all fit that paradigm, and continuing to squeeze our round peg into that square hole is ruining psychotherapy, and what makes it actually effective. Two human beings in a room working within a particular cultural setting and context. So the other paradigm is what has been called the contextual paradigm, which 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 does not assume that psychotherapy functions like a medical treatment and highlights all of the elements in the context that result in clients feeling help. So let me give you an example straight out of Australia. We've just completed and submitted a study that we started 3 years ago. This is the nature of research publications with a bunch of researchers, Chris Pepping and John Farhall, two really interesting folks. I met them at a conference. It must be 2015, 2016. And at the time, we were still trying to understand, well, how would you train deliberate practice? And I had been interviewing and interacting with psychics and tarot card readers, and impressed in many cases at their ability to connect and, within short measure, have people leaving their consultations, 20 minutes at times, feeling helped. So I suggested to John and Chris, and they've done virtually all of the work. Why don't we do a study about this? So we retrieved the 1996 Consumer Report questions that were used for Marty Seligman's report on psychotherapy. That one of the still most cited studies on psychotherapy, 90% of clients enjoy psychotherapy and find it helpful, was the main conclusion. All sorts of threats to that, but it's gotten a lot of play. And here's the interesting thing about that particular study. You can look it up, Consumer Report Psychotherapy Study 1996, Marty Seligman. About half of the data that was collected had nothing to do with psychotherapists. It had to do with friends, spiritual advisors, and family members and their potential helpfulness. Now, isn't that interesting? None of that data was reported. We asked for it. We were told that it didn't exist, but it wasn't reported. And now I think I know why. Because we replicated this study and we included psychics and spiritual advisors. And what we found was they were more helpful than therapists.